ACM is an organization that unites computing educators, researchers, and experts to motivate communication, share resources, and address the field's difficulties. As the world's largest computing society, ACM reinforces the aggregate voice through solid initiative, advancement of the best expectations, and recognition of specialized greatness. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Shivay Lamba, who is going to talk with us about open source development. This is a subject in which we should all be deeply interested because it's by learning open source development one can develop their skills in computing and programming and support the community. Our speaker has worked on open source development for a long time and is presently the engineering team lead at Dark House. He has been a GSoC mentor at Jenkins and CNCF and an open source developer at Layer 5. Moreover, he worked as an instructor and curriculum developer at the Code Foundation too. There are many more open source development development works done by a speaker. So let's welcome our speaker of the day to learn more about open source development, Mr. Shivay Lamba. Sir, the stage is yours. Sir, you're on mute.
Actually, I was not able to unmute myself earlier on. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you so much, Ayush, and for giving such a formal introduction. And of course, I'm really excited to see almost 40 plus people joining in to this session on a Saturday. Like that's usually an off. So really grateful for everyone to join in and get on this journey of open source. And of course, I would be keeping a tab on the chat. I'm not entirely sure if students would be allowed to unmute themselves, but of course, we'll take regular, pauses in between if anyone has any questions. But of course, we'll try to make this really communicative and really interactive because of all of you must be learning something new or the other today. And we are sort of covering today mainly three different things. And one is what exactly is open source. We'll look briefly into how to get started with Git and GitHub. And finally, we'll also be looking at how to actually contribute to large organizations or prepare for programs, a lot of different open source programs. And in general, how can you reach out to different kind of communities and contribute to their open source projects. So this is how we are going to be dividing our entire session today. And yeah, I'm really excited. So without wasting any other time, let me actually quickly share my screen. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so I think the sharing of screen functionality has been disabled. Could you please enable that? Ayush or Ariman from the team?
Just a second.
Yeah. But do keep in your questions posting in the chat section, and I'll be more than happy to take them up. And I'm hopeful that you're able to learn more about open source today. And in case you want to reach out to me later on, I'll be sharing my contact details as well, and I'll stay in touch with the MUJ ACM chapter. So if there is a requirement for some additional sessions, or I'll be more than happy to collaborate further. So yeah, I think yeah. It's still disabled. So do let me know once it's enabled.
Just a second.
I think it's still okay. So,
Yes, sir. Just give us a couple more seconds. We'll get it done.
yeah, not a problem. But do keep all of your questions coming in. Till then, I think there is one question that was already asked, Param. So, Param, we'll cover how to get started with open source as well, and yeah. So do keep posting in the chat, and we'll be very soon also sharing that. But if apart from that, if anyone has any other questions, with regards to anything else apart from open source, because of course we'll be covering a lot of those questions. If anyone has any questions with regards to general, how to get started with computer science or any other topics, you can ask right now. Otherwise, we'll also be taking them up later on once we finish up the session during the Q&A. But if anyone is having any other specific questions, okay. By the way, yeah, till the time the
Yes,
sharing of this,
try sharing your screen now.
it still says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, we'll work on it. So really
Alright.
sorry for this.
Yeah, not a problem. But yeah, till then, if anyone has any specific questions with regards to computer science or in general, related to engineering, feel free to ask. Of course, all the questions regarding open source would be taken up later. But by the way, Pranav asks that, yeah, so Pranav, actually, you'll see that a lot of research regarding, let's say, sciences, it could be medical sciences, it could be physics, astronomy, right? A lot of the softwares that are being used right now, you'll find a lot of different open source softwares that are being used in medical research, in physical research. Okay, by the way, I think I've been made the host. Yeah. So we'll also talk about a few of those projects today, and those projects themselves are completely open sourced and are being developed and further maintained by open source professionals, software developers who love open source. So these kind of softwares are directly used in research. So yeah, definitely it's something that open source will be used, and open source is actually used everywhere. So we'll look at examples and use cases as we move further ahead. So let me now quickly share my screen. Let's see. Okay. All right. So I think my screen should be visible now. And what I'll do is I'll start the video from all right. Do let me know if my screen is visible. Arvind, if you can please just confirm, or Ayush.
Yes, it's
The
visible,
screen
sir.
is visible.
All right, great. So again, welcome to everyone for the session, and for those joining in, we are going to be covering today what exactly is open source. Then we'll be covering on how can you actually get started with contributing to open source. What are some of the good learning paths? How to select organizations? How to select projects to which you can contribute to, and of course, we'll be showing like a hands-on demo on very popular tools that are required for open source, that is Git and GitHub. We'll see how to actually use them and get started on the open source journey. So the first thing, okay, all right. Now, as like a few of you had already introduced me, so thank you so much for that. But just a quick recap of that. So I have been involved with open source projects and contributing to open source now close to around 3 years. And during this time, I have been a Google Summer Code mentor with Jenkins and CNCF in 2020. And currently, I am a Google Summer Code mentor with TensorFlow and MediaPipe. Both of these are open source projects within machine learning domain by Google. And apart from that, I have also been an MLH fellow, and I'm also a Linux Foundation mentorship mentor for the SOTA Foundation. And apart from that, I've also been regularly contributing to Layer 5, that is again having a project called Meshery that is incubated inside of the CNCF. And apart from this, like I have also been just a part of a lot of other open source communities, but these are just to name a few of the ones that I have been just actively being part of. But of course that open source is all about collaboration, and even I myself, I'm always looking out for new ways to collaborate on open source and just help communities grow their open source outreach. And that's something that I really love to do during my weekends when I'm not part of my day-to-day job. So the first thing that we're going to be covering is like an introduction to FOSS. We'll come on to what exactly is FOSS, but also we'll start onto how to get started with these communities, how to get started contributing to them, and finally, like let's say what's the perks of actually joining open source communities. So I think there's some question. Yeah, Utkarsh, like we'll also talk about that as well. How does people yeah, we'll talk about ways to get paid, but do remember that open source is not just to get paid, right? Like yes, some people might get paid, but open source is more sort of related to being able to contribute to those kind of projects that impact multiple people's life. So yes, like some people get compensated, but of course, we don't want to contribute to open source with the intention of getting paid. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the first thing that of course, we want to get started with is why call it open source, and what, like, if you want to break it down, of course, open means that it is open to be collaborated on by anyone. So open source does not discriminate against your background or against your age, gender, or your location, or it does not matter whether you are contributing to a open source project at 5 a.m. in the morning or 5 p.m. in the evening, right? So open, like, why we call it open, because it is open for anyone to come in and chip in their ideas and actually collaborate with the code. And source is like essentially like the source code of the entire project or whatever we are working on. It's publicly available, and it can be shared, it can be worked on, it can be tweaked according to your own personal needs, or like let's say for others. So the first of all, it's open for to be collaborated on, to be used by anyone, and of course the source code is freely shareable at the same time. So like these are some of the benefits of open source, because it just makes it just makes it accessible for everyone, each and everyone, to actually use it. And yeah, so that's basically the definition of open source. And open source, but it's not just limited to software development. Open source is more sort of a philosophy that just allows the redistribution and access to any kind of a product. So it could be medical research, it could be like a construction item, or like a architectural drawing that you have created, right? And that sort of just gives access to everyone to that particular feature or that particular product's design, and how it has been implemented and how people can actually use it. So open source is not just limited to it's not just limited to open source software, right? Open source is more sort of philosophy that is being used inside of software development as well. And the main difference between open source and closed source, because this is one of the most commonly asked questions, and sorry, any kind of a software that is open source and one that is closed source, is that open source softwares are being released by these developer communities, right? And why do we call these as developer communities? Because hundreds and thousands of people can come in and they can get started with open source. And people all around the world are actually creating these softwares, are contributing from regardless of their age and like their area of wherever like they live, geographical area, like they contribute to that particular project. But let's take an example of a closed source software like Microsoft Word or Adobe Photoshop. Now these softwares are proprietary softwares by companies that are paid softwares. And one of the key things to keep in mind is that these softwares are being built by the teams in these companies. And let's say that there might be 50, 100 engineers at max who might be creating these softwares. But if you compare it with open source software, where hundreds and tens of thousands of developers all around the world can actually come and contribute to these projects. So that actually makes open source projects more and more secure, because bugs and security issues can be easily identified and be corrected very quickly, just because of the sheer amount of knowledge and sheer amount of developers that are actually there to contribute to it throughout the day and throughout day and night, right? And of course, because of the limited amount of teams that are there inside of these closed source softwares, it can actually take some time to fix any kind of issues that are related to security or bugs. So open source is actually much more quicker to solve. And of course, you get that feeling of a global community, because there are so many different number of people who are contributing to these projects. And of course, that the source code of the application is completely accessible in open source, while it is not accessible at all in a closed source software, right? So I hope like that makes sense to everyone. And the thing is that we are not just talking about open source software. We are more sort of concerned, or we are more into FOSS, and that is free and open source software, right? But free is not just limited to the free, like being free of cost. We're also using the free word to describe how do we actually use open source softwares. So it should be free to use, like free to use by anyone at every point of time during the day and night. Then we should have the freedom to actually modify the software according to our own needs, without having any restrictions that undermine the value of that particular software. Redistributed. So let's say that you get an open source software, you make changes to it, and you feel that it's a valuable addition. You can actually redistribute it completely free, and you should have that access when you are contributing to FOSS. And in case you didn't know about Linus Torvalds, Linus Torvalds is the creator of the Linux kernel and the Git, and we'll talk about like Git very soon. Git is basically a version control system. We'll go about what exactly is Git and how to get started with Git very soon. But Linus says that in real open source, you have the right to control your own destiny. And that is actually completely true, that in open source, you can do whatever you want with the source code. If you want to add new things, if you want to remove certain things, and you can do at any point of time. And that gives you control over what kind of software that you are desiring to actually build, because you get that much amount of knowledge and that much amount of expertise. So I hope like that makes sense to everyone. And again, there are certain criteria to classify whether a particular project or a particular software is open source. So of course, like it should be open source, like it should be free of cost. Then it should be openly accessible to everyone. It should be openly able to modify by anyone, as we have already described. And again, anyone can open it at any point of time from anywhere. And then of course, one of the most important things is that it should be open for reuse, because certain paid softwares, they give you only a limited amount of trials, after which you have to actually purchase. But with open source softwares, you should be actually able to reuse your your code as much as possible. And let's say you want to use it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, it should not be matter. I am seeing a couple of questions in the chat, and I would like to take them up very quickly. So Kaluri asks that how important is DS algo? So Kaluri, it's the simple answer to this, that DS algo might not appear to be as important in development, but of course DS algo is required whether you want to go into development or not. DS algo is something you don't even have to consider asking this question, because DS algo is something that you would need every day. Like you'll need if you are stuck to computer science, because even if, like, let's say you're not using the core fundamentals of data structures every day in your day-to-day job, it is still very important to take a few examples where it is actually required. So like it is required in certain ways, and and usually it is required to make your softwares more and more faster and more optimized. So you use concepts of data structure algorithms over there, but it's not a complete necessity. But it's still required that you do take up data structures algorithms regardless of whether you want to go for development or not. And Utkarsh asks, how does open source compare to closed source software like Apple as a business model? And if it is better, then why does not everyone adapt to it? So Utkarsh, like that's a very good question. And the idea is that a lot of these open source softwares, you'll find that these are getting funded by large companies like Apple themselves, right? And one of the reasons that a lot of like a lot of companies today are embracing open source, and they are actually working towards increasing number of open source softwares that are out there. And very recently, like a lot of different large companies have released some or the other softwares. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, of course, when you have a closed source software, right, you'll be having paid subscriptions that directly help generate revenue. But with open source softwares, you'll usually find that these software or these companies that are advocating about open source and have open source softwares, they do also have their own like ways in which they get funded. So whether it's through donations or people volunteering to contribute to it, or large companies actually supporting these open source projects and taking them inside of there or incubating them, right? So that actually does help drive these open source softwares. But in terms of like a business model, I would say, of course, like the closed source softwares are easily able to adopt because they are charging that. And from a business prospect, it might appear that these softwares, like these closed source software, is better. But today we are also seeing a lot of different alternatives for open source softwares that are also having like a paid subscription, that are only charging very, very demanding use cases. But we are seeing that open source softwares are being adopted by most of the companies, right? And they are being used internally to a full effect. So I hope like that answers your question. And Acer asks that are we going to have yeah, so in case if you do have, like, for first year students, it would just be getting started with open source, and we'll be talking about that very soon on how to get started if you're a beginner, right? We'll get started with that very soon. Now, apart from just the criteria that needs to be met for open source, there are a lot of different reasons that why you should actually embrace open source, because there are a lot of different benefits of getting started with open source. Now, one of the biggest ones is the quality and reliability, because as we know that there are so many amount of developers, reviewers, bug testers, that the quality of the open source code is actually very good, and they are reliable because a lot of these hidden bugs are already taken care of, that that are there. So in terms of reliability, like, you'll find a lot more number of less optimization issues when it comes to open source software. And of course, like, it's much more stable and has better security, because we are able to look out for any kind of impending issues with respect to the networks, and that makes them super useful and super safe to use. And of course, you get the adaptability to modify it according to your own need. It runs everywhere for everyone. And of course, the biggest one is that you get a community support. You can reach out to anyone in the community and ask questions and how to get started, and you're more likely to get a response very quickly. Now, some of the examples of open source softwares. Now, these are by no means just the few examples, because today, like, we get some or the other new software every day, right? And of course, like, these just show some of the biggest softwares, including the Linux kernel and the Ubuntu, that is the operating system based on Linux. We have PHP, Java, MySQL, right? And then WordPress. All these different softwares and protocols are completely open source. And again, like, as I've already said, that these are just a few of them. And now I want to take some time into discussing about the open source development model. Now, in case you have done an internship, or let's say you have just come out of school, right? So you have like a vertical hierarchy that when you are in your first standard, you learn about basic mathematics like addition and subtraction. But when we come to the discussion regarding the like let's say you go to your 12th standard, right? You study advanced calculus. So similarly with like whenever you're doing the job, your CEOs and executives, they are at the top, and then you have like a vertical layer where you come in quite late into like at the base level, being like let's say an engineer or an intern. So with open source, it does not have that kind of a vertical hierarchy. It is a very useful model where it basically says that everyone who is contributing to the open source project is at the same level. That means that you can reach out to anyone in the community and ask your doubts, and learn and how to contribute to open source without really getting let's say getting getting the word I would say is not really scared, but sometimes people they get self doubt. So of course that you can reach out to anyone in these like, and I call that as a flat hierarchy, because everyone is accessible to everyone. You might just have like let's say one project lead, the person who has been contributing to that particular project for a long time. But of course open source is all about collaboration, is all about keeping it open-minded. So that is why it does not see that kind of a hierarchy. So I hope like this is very useful to everyone. And why contributing is important, because of course we have spoken about all the wonderful things that are related to open source. Now another question that people usually ask is like why should we actually contribute to open source? Like what are we getting out of it? So the first thing that I would want to speak is getting real world software development experience, right? So the idea is that a lot of the open source programs and projects, they use softwares that you'll also find inside when you're doing internships at large or even smaller corporations. So even though you're not doing like a technical internship, or let's say you're not doing like you're not having that access, you can still get access to those kind of tools and using and getting comfortable with those kind of tools if you're interested, and follow the standard practices that are there inside of the development processes when they start. So you do get real world software development experience from these open source projects, and not just with regards to softwares, but also the best practices, like how to properly comment your code, how to create a pull request, how to format your code, right? How to optimize your code. All of that is actually done when you are contributing to open source. And then of course you get community bonding, you get exposure, and access to so many different users, right? And then of course you can test your own skills to be used during the presentation, like while contributing. So you can test your own development skills and contribute to open source. But probably the biggest one is the satisfaction. So I love to give this example of the VLC media player. Now the VLC media player is an open sourced media player, right? And let's suppose that one of its key functions actually stopped working. Now this VLC media player is actually being used today by millions of users, right? If not millions, then hundreds and thousands of users. And if this like one groundbreaking issue stops working, so you can just think about the impact that, let's say, if you are able to solve it, and that means that you have just solved an issue for millions of users. And that is the access with which open source really is great to get started with. And now again, the next step is how to actually step into open source, right? By the way, I think there are some questions, so we'll take them up. So one is, are there some type of moderators who verify legit code and prevent sabotage? Yes, Utkarsh, of course. So these code maintainers, or we call them as the project leads, or project maintainer, they are always there to review every pull request and every changes that the community members they make. So there is a standard review process that takes place for every contribution that is made. None of the changes being made by community members are directly, merged into the main project, and all these changes are first of all looked into, and only then, once it has been successful, that they are successfully loaded into the code base. So I hope like that gives an answer to your question. And currently we'll be coming on to how to find beginner friendly issues. We'll speak about that in a bit, right? As we step into how to get started with the contributions, right? So we'll have a look at that as well. Now, stepping into the FOSS world, right? There are a certain amount of prerequisites that are required if you want to get started with open source. And of course, the biggest one of them is Git. Now, we'll also just speak briefly about Git and how to get started with Git. But the idea is that Git is a version control system that allows us to basically maintain and work in collaborative environments based on, like, it's like a version controlling system which allows you to work remotely with other people on a particular project, on the same project that is being used by so many number of people. So that is what is something that is an absolute requirement. And whether you are working on a web development project or you are working on a machine learning project, right? Git is something that will be required. And then you should know at least one programming language. So even if you are not completely aware of the entire programming, even then, at least if you have knowledge about one programming language out of those, that would be very helpful. And of course, like whatever project that you're wanting to contribute to, let's say within web development you love React, then you should also know at least all the basic things regarding that particular object, right? So getting to know at least the basic or the medium knowledge level, like for your programming language. So for example, let's say if you are well versed with JavaScript, how to use other how to basically, let's say, contribute to JavaScript based repositories and projects. And we'll also show you how to actually get selected for those, like how to select those organizations to which you want to actually apply for. And like these are some of the prerequisites. Now, of course, like we want to get started with Git, right? So this is hands down one of the best links that are there. So you can go to guides.github.com/introduction/git handbook, where you actually find the handbook that I just described. And of course, that as you already said, that Git itself, it's a open source distributed version control system, right? And right now it's still in the process to find out what exactly how to basically use Git and enable multiple people to contribute to large code bases at the same time. So it basically helps maintain a log of all of that, and it helps maintain consistency in most cases. So yeah, you can visit this specific link, that is guides.github.com/introduction/git handbook. And we'll also today cover basics of Git as well. So we'll look into that briefly, right? And again, apart from this Git, the thing is that the sort of the $1 billion question that everyone asks, that how how to get started or how to contribute to FOSS, right? That is like the $1 billion question that everyone asks, and I get this question probably the most number of times. How to get started with open source, how to get started with for that matter any kind of a technology. The idea is that it's just you have to start by yourself. You don't have to wait for an opportunity to actually come in and step in for you, right? So the idea is to start by yourself. And how you can actually start by yourself with just creating your very own open source project, right? So you can log into, let's say, like a site like GitHub, where it hosts different types of articles, or like, let's say, it stores different kind of projects. So you can create your own first ever project and contribution to your open source project on GitHub. And I'll just show you how we actually use GitHub as well. Or like, let's say you can help out your friends. Now that sort of gives you an insight on how actually GitHub works and how Git and GitHub works. And of course, with more and more time, you get confident enough to work on larger projects as well. So that's something to keep in mind when So the thing is that you don't have to wait for anyone, and you yourself have to get started with it. And of course, that whenever we are maintaining any kind of an open source software, there are certain things that are absolutely necessary. So license is basically, a text that tells who was the original owner of, the project, and how this can be used, for development, right? Like how can, like, it basically, like, the license describes the ways in which the reproduced act can be used, like, and so it basically describes those. And then we should always create a proper documentation on how to get started with contributing to open source, right? So do provide like proper documentations, create issues if you are facing any, and issues basically are uh, in development, right? And you can point out, like, let's say if you do not get someone to complete like, let's say, a task, or you are stuck somewhere, you can actually open up an issue in your GitHub repository, and ask for help. And the idea is that keep on taking helping others, and like these are just some of the things that are usually attributed to and are needed when you're contributing to open source. And of course, like, the next thing that we are going to be doing right now is actually see how you can get started with these organizations as well. So the idea is that the more and more you practice with your own set of projects, the better it makes you understand how do open source works, how do Git and GitHub works, and that sort of can help you, while you're trying to find like, how should I make more meaningful contributions? How can I um, how can I, let's say, contribute to large organizations projects, right? For example, how can I contribute to TensorFlow? TensorFlow is like a library in Google, right? And it's quite well known. And like, how, if I want to contribute to that particular project, how can I do that, right? So the idea is that, again, usually I like to describe it as this three-step process, that find an organization that excites you, right? You'll find certain organizations that excite you, and then you start interacting with those memories, right? And those use cases that were described. That once you have found out an organization, start interacting with the members, start interacting with all the different mentors, and again, newcomers like you who are there. And of course, then you have to code. Now there are two ways through which you can like, choose an organization. So it's the top-down and the bottom-up approach, right? In case of the top-down approach, you essentially learn the skills, right? Let's say you're well versed with Go, or you're well versed with CNCF, right? So then you have to learn the skills that are there inside of that, right? So like, let's say you like Python, you like JavaScript, right? And then what happens is that once you have learned those skills and you feel comfortable, you can choose now the organizations that do have projects for that do have actual projects, right? Related to those particular technologies. So you can try to find out, those kind of projects. And of course, like, the other one is the bottom approach, where you want to contribute to your favorite, organization, and you select the organization, and then you look at the different projects, and whichever project actually, you like that particular project, you can learn the appropriate skills to actually get started with that, project. Because a lot of times what I've seen, right, is that a lot of people who are very very eager to actually learn new technologies, they find it much more easier to actually transition to like choosing the projects, because once you have understood, okay, like, you want to contribute to, like, let's say, JavaScript based projects, so you can like like, you can choose that particular language or that particular technology stack, and then on the basis of that you can choose the different kind of organizations, right? So I usually like to showcase it as a two step approach, whether it's like learning the technology beforehand and then contributing, or by looking into how to contribute and then actually making changes. So I hope like this gives an perspective to everyone. And like, another common question that people ask is that how many communities should we actually choose, or how many different kind of organization like, should we choose? And that really just depends on you. I like to maintain like open source during the weekends, and I usually contribute to a couple of different open source projects. But I have like had the ability to use multiple one of those, or at the same time contribute to multiple one of those. But it just depends on you, like if you want to contribute to one or two different types of like two different types, right? So it's totally just depends on how many number you can take up. And of course, like once we have chosen the organization, right, what to do the next step, right, what to do next. So of course that basically once you actually join a particular organization, I like to describe these as the three pillars that are paramount to be used in the discussion. So the first one is, of course, that you introduce yourself. And of course you don't just go about introducing yourself as, like, let's say, yeah, I'm this XYZ person from this team. You're actually contributing to the open source by giving your introduction. So this be very like very compact in your instruction, and just look out for open issues, right? And that way you can then get yourself started at least. So that is the first thing, that you introduce yourself to the mentors, to other people in the community. Then you search for different kind of projects, and you search for which particular project and these are like not the project like the times that like are directly linked. So like again, you can search for different kinds of projects. You can search for the projects that you have used yourself, right? And you like them, or like let's say you can ask others to like talk about how like it can be used. So yeah, of course, these are some of the major points to keep in mind. And once you have, like, let's say, selected a particular project, do look out for any kind of open issues. And we'll also, like, today we'll look at how to look at those open issues and how to fix them, right? So for example, like in this case, we had like that we had the video, and then we do have like the data coming in, right? Because we want to solve these issues and fix them as quickly as possible. uh, and you can get started by looking at those by just looking at all the different open issues that people usually have. So by this time, like, if anyone has any questions so far, feel free to ask, right? Otherwise we'll continue. And of course, like, in case you do want to ask, keep on tagging me in the chat, and I would love to take those questions up one by one. Anyway, so the next thing is that once you have introduced yourself, you have searched for the projects, and you start contributing to these projects, right? Now the next step that we're looking at is filtering, like, the matches. So of course you can try to filter out projects based on the language, or you can do one thing, is that in case you don't know about a particular technology and you don't want to continue it, then of course, like, it's something to also keep in mind. So of course, like, with this you can actually get narrowed down to like, let's say, two or three other members, right? So this is something to keep in mind. And of course that the thing is that you don't have to wait for anyone. You just have to start at that moment itself, right, to actually look out. So I hope, like, that makes sense to everyone. But yeah, like, the tip is to now get started, right, without wasting any other time. And of course, let's talk briefly about the developer cycle. So how do developers working in an open source environment, how do they work? So of course, that the first thing that you do is that you try to find out some kind of existing issues, or try to work on some new issues, right? And all of them have been given a certain value, right, that sort of tells what is the level of precision required, right? So once you've found out the bugs, of course, it will take time to actually resolve those particular bugs, right? And the idea is that if you do get stuck, feel free to ask people in the community who can help out with this. So the idea is that we are basically using these existing tools which help us track these issues, and these are then communicated further, right? And once you've made these changes, right, you can then basically deploy, right? You can basically create a pull request, and that should be helpful. right? And with the help of the pull request, like you are going to be looking at like whether the pull request gets accepted or not, and you move on directly to the next role, right? So I hope like that makes sense to everyone. So it's as simple as choosing an issue, fixing it, and trying it out, and then finally testing it. So that is what we need to have. So does anyone have any questions so far, by the way? Okay, so I don't think so. I see any other questions for now. Let's see. I think there's a new one. So Rohan asks that if we are following the team first approach, then how do we know we have reached a certain point after which we can start contributing? So Rohan, like that's also a very valid question, and of course that is where contributing yourself in your free time, like let's say that actually does pay off, right? Because as with in case of the developer cycle, sometimes like let's say there is no internet, or like let's say there's some issue that with which you have to start off the day like a little later, and you start contributing a little later, but essentially we are having meets and like the developer cycle that is being followed over here. I think so it's pretty self-explanatory, right? So that is why I just wanted to ask everyone, like how can, like, if you do have experience of contributing, or let's say using programming, how do you go about solving different things? Because in open source it's all about the collaboration and creating and learning these technologies and using them. And Utkarsh asks that, so in open source mostly about debugging. Yeah, of course, like Utkarsh, there are always going to be innovations happening. Now, this is like just an example for beginners to get started with. But of course, a lot of innovation is actually also going on, because these are full-fledged softwares, right? It's not that we are borrowing over some of these softwares, from somewhere else. These are inbuilt into the app. So that makes sense to everyone. Yeah, of course. So let's continue. Now, of course, that let's say that you have gone through all of this, right? And you see that, okay, you were not selected, but others were selected, right? So this, again, the thing is that, even if you might not have gotten, let's say this completely true, it's still important to, maintain balance, right? And of course, you don't need to be a pro. You don't need to necessarily be from a computer science background. You can be from a normal bachelor of engineering background and still, contribute to open source. And you don't need to learn the entire code base from the start, right? Because for me personally, it took around, you could say like, I guess it was, I'm not able to remember, but of course, like, you don't need to be from like you don't have to be absolutely required to have like a computer science background, right? And you don't need to understand the entire code base. So you can go about and learning these code bases one by one, right? So you can take up those as well if you want to use. So of course, like interacting with as many number of developers as required, and of course being always active and helping out people, right? That is something that is needed. And again, the thing is that let's talk about a few of the open source, communities and ventures that are actually going ahead. So a lot of you might have already heard about Google Summer of Code, right? Google Summer of Code is basically a mentorship program, right, for a period of 3 months, right? That usually takes place in the summer of every year. And Google, being one of the world's largest, proponents into this, has basically created a lot of different other a lot of the other different types of users, right? So the first thing that you need to do is first, like, let's discuss about all of these different different programs later on, once we have learned how to get started with the contributions. So we'll discuss about all of these different programs later on. Now, of course, that in case, like, you don't get selected by any of these values. So it's okay to take more time and learn from the experience, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And of course that most of the time that you actually spend, like a lot of that actually goes into studying and then learning technologies, right? And that, I hope like that answers the question. All right. And of course, like contributing to open source does have its own perk as well. Now probably the biggest one is like the stipends, and of course those are all great, but probably the biggest one for me is like that just that global amount of effort that is put in, because with that you can actually describe the issues, right, and you can share those as well. So that is one of the most important things to keep in mind. I hope like that makes sense to everyone. And then Param asks, can we start with debugging and solving typo errors in beginning? Yes, absolutely, Param. Like the contributions that you make can be as minuscule as like just changing some variables. That does not hamper with the mentioned issue, right? So even that should be working. So yeah, like again, the idea is that with close or like open events, right, the amount of interactions that you can do are countless. But of course with the lockdown and all, right, the contributions that you make, right, those are virtually, right, and all these different major programs are also virtual. So you get, at the comfort of your home, you can contribute to such amazing projects and get like stipend, and of course you get the experience of working on a real world software development based project, right? And when like let's say you have completed your program, later on you also get the experience, the ability to actually travel to different kind of conferences and talk about the projects that you actually built, right? So there are a lot of different perks that are there for students specifically in open source to keep in mind. And of course, like there are a lot of different other programs as well, like the WWDC, then Google I/O, right? The Facebook F8 Marathon, Hackathon, right? Then different kind of other slips. Like there are a lot of different programs that are geared towards open source developers. And again, one thing to keep in mind is that you see in this meme is that if you are like really great at open source, it wouldn't actually be of much use if you can't clear the basic data structures and algorithms. So the question, the first question that was one of the first questions that was actually asked was regarding this only. And the again, the issue is that it cannot be shared. So that is something to keep in mind. You will have to still clear the data structure algorithm round, and that will be sort of the central thing to keep in mind. You will still be required to give those tests and pass those, and only then you can get selected. So that is something to keep in mind when you're contributing to open source. And of course, that what we have learned so far about open source is that everyone shares the same goal, right? Everyone shares the work, right? You distribute the work in small tasks and assign each other and to help out. And of course, like we are sharing the results with everyone as well. Now we'll quickly have a look at how to get started with Git and GitHub, right? So of course, like we'll get started with that, and then we'll talk about some of the open source programs, how to get started with those. So let me actually share my screen again. Till then, I'll just take up a few of the questions that have been there inside of the question and answer portal. And so Param asks, can we start debugging and solving typo errors? Yeah, so I've already answered that. Yes, you can definitely get started. Like the thing is that, of course, the first trial you cannot create entire logics. So like this will basically help us out, right? So of course, the first thing to keep in mind is the most important thing to sort of look at is that you can literally do any kind of contribution when it comes to open source, right? And of course, me myself, I experienced that to be really important as well, right? And you can really do a lot of different things in your first ever contribution. So even my first ever contribution was, related to changing a few things in the README, and I felt really great that I was able to, truly contribute to open source. So you can do anything to, get started with contribution. There's nothing as such as big or small, right? So the next thing that Param asks is that some critical things to keep sorted for getting GSoC. Again, Param will come on to that a bit later after our demo. All right. So, and again, the other question I think Ayush is asking is, what open source project did you have the most fun? According to me, the best fun that I had was definitely the Meshery project from Layer 5, because there the community is, very, very interactive. And of course, like it's a great place, to think about, because there are like, things being discussed or being used a lot of times, and of course like the crowd which is there, like even they can have a look. But of course like this shows the main difference. So in case of like for me personally, the Layer 5 project was definitely something that I had the most fun with. So if that makes sense. Now I think there are no other questions. So with that, we'll also, now give a very quick introduction to what exactly is GitHub, right? Now, as I've already described that Git is a version controlling system, and actually let me now share my screen as well. So give me just 1 second. Let's see. Let me share my screen again. All right. I think I've already shared the screen now. So let's get started. Right. So what we are going to be doing is that we are going to be looking at, first of all on GitHub and how to, get started with GitHub. So basically GitHub is like a site where you can, open source all your different kind of projects, right? And it's like a really great site to showcase your open source related work. You can create any kind of an open source repository over here and make it visible, for everyone to use it for. And of course that the major thing to keep in mind is that that we do have the requisite amount of resources, right? So essentially, you can use GitHub as a platform to host your own code, to host your own projects, right? And now the next play is like to understand how can you use it to detect the player, right? Or like let's say to detect person who are using GitHub and understand like whether their their projects are open source or they are not. So basically GitHub is a central repository for all different kind of projects that are out there, right? And one thing to sort of look at is yeah. So like let's say if you want to create a new account, you just need to go to github.com and you can create an account. And in case you are already having an account, you just need to log in, right? And you just need to log into GitHub and get started. There's another question from Param. Research selection criteria to keep in mind for projects to which we should contribute to. So there are a lot of different projects from organizations like CA Microscope. Now CA Microscope is providing an open source solution for data model engineering, right? And like that does require again a lot of that is required time, right? And of course, like the selection for the players, that is something that is important. So the most important things to keep in mind is that when you're selecting any particular project, there are a lot of different projects from other organizations like the CERN, and then we have INCF that is specifically for neural sciences, and their projects are a lot of them are actually based on the open source projects. So you can have a look at those particular open source projects that are being used in these organizations, and of course like they are directly used for the other values well. And of course like again the question is related to GSoC that will be contributing we'll be talking about that very soon after the demo. So I hope like that gives the answer. So like let's say that you have created your account, you want to create your first ever repository. So you can click on this plus button, or you can actually also go to your profile. For example, I'll go to my profile, And over here you can, like you have the ability to see all the different repositories that you have created. Now essentially these repositories are nothing but like folders. Like we have folders in our in our local file system. So like similar to that, we do have like these open source, like we have all these different folders for the projects that are there, right? And we are going to basically creating a new project similar to this one. For example, I have 375 different projects that are there, basically the repositories. So let's say I want to create a new one. So I can basically give it a name, right? Let's say I give it a name as MUJ ACM workshop, right? Let's say I give the name as this. And then you also have the ability to add, like, let's say a description to it. If you want to add like a description to the to the repository, then you have the ability to either create it public or private, right? So if you keep it like private, then it's no longer open source, right? Now again, the ability to get those links and to do it, like, it's important, right? So again, you can add description. So let's say I can add a description like a workshop on open source, right? I can add like a description, and like this is a workshop, right? All right, I think we are done. And then I'll choose it as public. Now there are three other different type of files that you can add. The readme file is basically the description of your project. If your project does not have a good dictionary, right, then it's not worth. So it's very important to find the right kind of documentation being done, and we need like that to happen. And of course the next one is like using the .getignore. Now essentially .getignore is just stuff, right? Like that is important to be used. So like sometimes you don't want certain dependencies of your projects to actually get downloaded, because that just requires a lot of space. So in order to use that, we basically use this command line tool called getignore, using which we can ignore certain files to be actually loaded to our SSL, right? So I hope like that makes sense. And of course we can always create guidelines for everyone, right? So once you're done with this, right, you click on create the repository. Now how, like, basically by default, if you look at it, like it's completely blank, right? Now let's say if you want to also contribute to it via open source, right? How to get started with that, right? So that is what we're going to be briefly talking about today. And how to set up. So basically to download Git, you can simply just go to git.com and git SCM, I guess, like that's what Git download. So you can simply just put in Git download, and you can go to the git scm-scm.com, and over here you can download it for Windows, Mac, or Linux, right? So you can download for all three of them. And once you have actually downloaded this, you should be able to actually see something like along these lines that I'm sharing in my screen, is that you should see something like this: Git GUI and the Git CMD, right? So for every clip that we have, we need to find out the number of, like, the ID of the basically we need to find out or convert those frames into the numbers, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, like, you can get started very quickly with the git bash. For example, let's say I open git bash. And now the thing is that some of the things that you need to sort of follow along, and of course, like, we will guide through each one of those. So the idea is that, like, we can create the repository using command line, or like, let's say we can create the repository using like the GitHub, and create like a file as well, because this shows you like create a new file that will automatically create a file. But let's say if you want to run this locally via Git, so again what I can do is that I can follow these steps, right? And for that, again, you do need to install Git in your system, and I'll use like a standard command prompt. And then what I'm going to be doing is that the first thing that you see is git init. So basically git init is a way for to basically understand how these processes work, right? And that is one of the most important things to keep in mind. I hope like that makes sense. So the idea is that first you create a clone of your own project, right? Of your own polling, and like we use that essentially, right? So the first thing that we're going to be doing is that we are going to be initializing Git. So let's say I create a new folder MUJ, right? So I create a new very quick folder mkdir MUJ, and I go to cd MUJ. Right now inside over here, like we're going to be discussing about like how to get started, right, with contribution, and we are discussing about different kind of projects and their implementations. Now once we have done, like we are good to go, so we do something like git init, right? So I'm going to be using the git init, right? Sorry. So we are going to be using the git init. Now, what exactly does git init do? Like it just creates that environment around you, like a positive environment, and that environment is then used to describe any kind of git related issues to that particular project. So I hope like that makes sense to everyone. So the first thing that we have done is we have initialized a sample repository or an empty GitHub repository or empty Git repository, right? And that is the first thing that we do. Now, after that, we are basically going to be adding a README file. So let's say that, I'm going to be talking about after having made some changes, I can quickly just, add that particular branch. And then in case, like, let's say there are some questions, right? Let's suppose it's related to um, like one of the examples that probably comes to my mind is that of particular user. So the idea is that you add, like, let's say the files. So let's say I add I do that and I add readme, right? And then basically what does like this add command do is that whatever changes that you have in your system, right? So see, for example, like let's say that we have two different types of folders, right? And I create a copy of the first folder and I use it, right? So of course, like there will be a lot of differences between both of them, and like whatever changes that you make in one will not actually affect changes in the others. Now based on the steps, like there are different types of platforms, and something to keep in mind. So the idea is that once these changes that you make locally, if these need to be made aware to thousands and 10,000s of users, right, we use git. So we basically go back to git, right, and we basically start from scratch, let's say. So whatever whatever you make, right, and the idea is that with the help of that we can actually document those changes that are being done, right, to help in open source, right? So you can make changes, and then, like, let's say if you want to showcase those changes in the cloud, right, in the cloud, then in that case we basically use the add command that sort of adds the trend of listing items into done or being in under review. So that gives confidence as well. So the thing that you'll have to do is that based on the empty repository, we'll have to generate action, right? And that will help clear. So the first, like, let's say the change that we do is like we add like a README file, right? And in that case, what we're going to be doing is that we are going to just do this git add readme.md. That means that we are adding like a markdown file, right? And like this is what we are going to be taking up. So we are going to be using this git add readme, right? And of course, like it fails because we haven't actually created a readme file so far. So the first thing that we are going to be doing is that we are going to be actually creating a readme file, right? And for that, I'll just quickly use something like VS Code. So I'll open this in VS Code, and VS Code, for those people who might not be knowing, is Visual Studio Code. That is like a code editor. So you simply open your code editor, right? And we'll simply very quickly create like a README file. Till then, like if anyone has any questions, I would love to take them because I don't see any questions out of recently. If anyone has any questions so far with respect to GitHub and open source, feel free to ask. And over here, while we just wait for it to open up, let's also create. We can probably take a question or two. Ayush asks, in which open source project did you gain the most amount of knowledge? Ayush, like it actually depends on each and every different experience. Like each experience is wilder than other, right? So of course, like it is very probably the most amount of knowledge that I gained was, while I was working with the Google TensorFlow team. And like I really learned a lot of different inner concepts of machine learning with the help of TensorFlow. And of course, apart from that, the layer 5 community that I've already spoken about, how to get started with cloud computing, Meshery, and using that, and you like still going ahead. So that's something to keep in mind that I've sort of gained the most amount of knowledge for. Okay, so TensorFlow is essentially like an open source library that has been written by the Google team. It's used for detection of like let's say it's being used for a lot of different deep learning and neural network machine learning ideas. So something to sort of keep in mind. Like it has a lot of different use cases as well, right? So I hope like that makes sense. And then the main difference between Git and GitHub. So see, basically GitHub is a platform where you host your projects, right? But Git is much more than just simple hackathon, right? It's more focused towards the communities. And like with GitHub, like you represent your work, but what exactly is Git? Git is a version control system. It helps sort of look at, okay, how many number of changes were there, right? And who made the changes at what timestamp, right? We can get all of that using in Git, and you can actually use that for real-time collaboration and working on similar kind of projects, right? And that's what like being powered over here. So I hope like that makes sense to you, like the main difference between Git and GitHub. And Yashi, like you don't require any kind of pre-knowledge of like let's say like very deep knowledge, I would say. But of course, if you want to get started, do learn at least some basic algorithms, right? And even if like let's say if you don't want to contribute to the technical side, you can still do that, right? And you can also do like contribute to, let's say, to the documentation or some other information. But I hope like this makes sense. And like the next question by Acer is, didn't your project code can be stolen if you make it online like that? So see, the thing is that we are making it open source so that people can come in and use it, right? And again, like it definitely sounds to be something like quite logical, but again, more and more companies today are going over and using these closed source software, right? Like basically we are using these exams to sort of help. And one thing to keep in mind is that with the help of these, like we can definitely bring more involved, right? So the idea is that yes, like you could probably do that, but of course you have the appropriate licenses that help inform you whether what is the issue that is being caused. So the thing is that like I wouldn't necessarily think too much about that, because of course like open source you can actually just use the commands and it's not like fake. So I hope like that makes sense. By the way, I think that my VS Code must have started. All right, and then over here I'll just like use a new terminal and I'll basically create a new file over here by the name of readme.md, right? So I create this readme.md and I just put in, let's say that I put in hello, like, or let's say MUJ ACM workshop, right? We give it this name, right? So I'll again just workshop, right? So like we are going to be open for one day. And now we're going to be like, saving this. And now the thing is that, as you can see that inside of my version control, it says that, there are certain changes that are yet to be staged. And what do we mean by staged is that like those should come in later, right? So as soon as I add that, right, you can have a look at, like, let's say now if I try to, add, like do the git add readme.md, it should work, because now what has happened is that it has now brought that same piece of code, right, that we have into a development stage, right? And now it's the task to, find out the class and all, right, because that's something to keep in mind. Now, another thing to sort of also look at is that we can do like, the commits here, right? And for example, let's say that we do have some usefulness, right? So you can do something like, whenever you make some changes and you want to finalize those, we basically have the the commit screen, right? And of course, like how to do that is just basically adding like the git commit, and then adding like the hyphen message symbol, and then whatever, like, is your first commit. So you can actually do that as well. So you basically do something like basically not using git add. And again, like for those people who didn't know git add, git add allows us to basically transfer the learnings that we have, right, and then use them in real world application, right? So like that is one of the things. But of course, like like this is definitely something to keep in mind, that like there are so many uses, right? So the first thing that we're going to be doing is that we're going to be adding a git commit statement. So let's say I add git commit. This basically tells that, okay, yeah, the system, or you basically tell the system inside of where it's happening, that now you're confirming that yes, like you would want to work on this, right? So you give like the commit, and then you provide like message, and that could be anything. So like let's say I can say created readme.md, right? So again, do readme dot, and of course, like once you have created like this readme log, like again, sorry, like I used git again twice. And like as you can see that there is one change that has been made. Now this change is part of your social profile, right? So this is something that will remain the same. And of course, like once we have created the readme file, we basically have to add like a remote origin to this particular GitHub repository, because the thing is that we are running right now the Git locally, but you want to actually connect it to your GitHub, so that the bonus is sort of like used in terms of getting creating a channel for communication between like the web server and locally. So like we just need to add this over here, so you can simply just copy. And again, the idea is to get like a sole grip over, right, the overall issue. So yeah, I hope like that makes sense to everyone. But if anyone has any questions so far, like feel free to ask. But what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be copying this git remote add origin, and I'm going to be adding it to to our system. And as you can see, like it does not give any issue. But now finally, what we are seeing is that git push origin main. And what does this do is that it basically helps us out, to invite other stakeholders and like to finally push the changes that you have been making in like link. So just two things to keep in mind is that whenever you have any doubt, like do ask, right? And basically this is something to keep in mind to get used to it. So the idea is that we are basically providing sample clips, and we can use those to help on this session. So I hope like that makes it clear to everyone. So what we'll do is that to push the changes to our main file, that is the MUJ ACM workshop, we're going to be using the git push origin main, and that should send across. So Okay, so I think let me actually do this. And one thing that you can also do is that once this is done, you can probably let's say add like a branch. So basically we'll also speak about what exactly are Git branches. But once you have added uh, the remote addition, right? You have created the commit, right? So basically Git commit is that, okay, you're committing now, but you're making sure that the changes that you have made will be permanently represented in the, or not necessarily permanently, but they will be represented in like when we are talking. And of course, once you click on this push button, right, basically I can use something like git push over here, right? And that will okay, so we just use this. So I think by default it is master, right? So we'll just use this, and it will basically push our code to the master branch, right? So the master is like the main branch. So as soon as I now go back and refresh this page, I will see that I have like this README file created that I created locally. So the first thing that we did was that we created a file locally. I added that to my local Git, but I didn't confirm it. So it was still part of like the handling, right? And of course then we discussed about how to use commit. And of course like the Git commit, it sort of tells the the software engineer or like anyone working that yes, this will work out. And of course like you get a lot of accolades, right? And then finally like to deliver, right? So those are the most important things to keep in mind. But of course like now to give like just a very quick overview about the rest of the platform. Now, as you can see, like, this is a project that I've created. Now I can edit this project and, I can make changes to it again. And then there are certain things to keep in mind in GitHub, right? So this issues tab is where you can, raise issues. So one of the issues that, I'll probably do for this particular workshop today is, just creating like, let's say a title by the name of contributing to this repository, right? For MUJ students. So what you can do is that over here, I would request everyone, to sort of use this repository, use the git commands to actually create, let's say, a program that you might have learned in data structural algorithms, right? Any kind of a structure-based program, right? It could be like a stack queue, anything. And like contributing to MUJ students, right? Contributing to MUJ students. So over here, I'm just creating this issue that, and I can add description as well to it. And that will help us to find out the true number of people. So the next thing that we're also seeing are like these pull requests. So essentially what exactly are pull requests? Pull requests are like ways in which you might not be having information about certain people, but you're able to create like, you're able to then generate like how or to sort of work on that. Because like that is one of the most important questions to keep in mind. Like in case you don't have access to a particular repository, because by default like you only have access to what you make, right? So like let's say if you want someone else's idea to keep in mind, then we did that and that actually helped a lot, right? So with regards to like the topics, right? Like those are, I hope like those are making sense. But of course, like pull requests are just requesting the person to like accept whether they want it or not. So the next one is like apart from pull requests, we have these three different buttons. So of course, like the star button is basically used to create like star. But of course, like the other question that I got was regarding that what is a fork. A fork is essentially creating a local copy of any kind of a GitHub project, right? Or for that matter, like whatever kind of like things you're using. So for example, if I go to one of the projects from GitHub, from Google, like let's say, so I go to github.com/Google, right? And I look out for a particular project. So you'll find like most of the major companies, they have their open source projects and available on GitHub. So let's say I want to contribute to this, this project by the name of IT Cert Automation Practice, right? And I want to contribute to it. So what I can do is I can actually create a fork. And what it will do is that once I create a fork, it will basically allow me to, go ahead and actually contribute to it. So I can actually fork this, and as you can see now, it sort of shows me like, that I have my own version of the same software, but it is, configured for others, right? Not for so yeah, okay, that makes sense. And of course, like apart from that, like we just wanted to review, right? Like the uses. So I hope like that's clear to everyone. So again, the things that as you can see that, right now it's active. So as you feel, right, so we basically just describe the user, right? And of course we would need much more deeper integration to do that, right? So that is something to keep in mind. Does anyone have any questions so far, by the way? Love to take up any questions that people might be having. Do keep your questions coming in if you have any doubts. So let's say that I want to contribute to a particular project. How should I do that? So it's very simple that you select a project that you want to work on. So for that, what I'll do is that I will create like I'll try to do it on my friend's profile. My friend's name is Pulkit, so I'm going to be doing it on his profile and on one of his projects. So let's very quickly go to one of his repositories, and let's say I want to contribute to this particular project called cat hack submission. So what I'll do is that I will basically create a fork, right? And fork basically creates a local copy for myself. And now once I've created this fork, right, either like I can converse more about it, or like of course we can play. So like let's say that I want to make some changes to it in like the readme. For example, let's say in the readme I want to add like what kind of technology stacks did they use. So for example, I can add like technology stack used is, let's say, JavaScript, Python, right? Then we have so you can basically use all these different ones, right? And of course we do have like a lot of different sponsors, right? So of course like all those links, and like we did use quite a lot of different technology stacks, right? As well. So the most important thing to keep in mind is with regards to that. Now of course there are a lot of different other things to keep in mind, and like we can like let's say we just want to add this and we can create the changes. Let's say I added new teams, right? So we basically commit these changes, and basically we have used something like the technology stack. Now if you consider one thing, that if I open up my own repository and the one that is by Mido Puller, right? And if I go specifically to this cat hack submission, now if I go over here, as you can see, like it does not have the changes that I had made. It's only visible for me, like changes that I've made. So what we need to do is that we can like let's say add like the like about section about like which particular club or course is it, right? So we can add like that particular one. So for example, now if I want this to reflect in the main repository as well, you can see that it says that my branch is one commit ahead because I had created a commit. And let's say if I want to contribute to it, I can basically create a pull request, right? So to open the pull request, it's simple, right? That you go to the like again base sites, and of course like there's something to keep in mind. So the first thing that we need to do is like the second bills, right? So we need to basically add these changes that we need, like, and we're going to be requesting my friend to actually add them, right? Request item. But what I'm going to be doing is that this is just for a demo, so you can ignore it, right? But of course like what we're going to be doing is just adding more number of players, right? So of course like the better thing is just to keep it aside at all. So I hope like that makes sense to everyone. Like you can add basically, let's say that added new teams, not added new teams, but let's say added the issue, like fix the issue, right? Like let's say fixed or like added readme, right? Added readme, and you can give more amount of details, or you can say like directly create the pull request for it. And as you can see, right, that I have created a pull request, and I'll just, tell my friend that, hey, ignore this pull request for now, right? Because it's just for demo purposes. This is how you can also contribute to other different kinds of open source organizations and companies by looking at their code base, right? So what you have to do is that you go to any other profile, and first, I'll just take up the questions. Kathan asks that did multiple hackathons you participate help in open source? Yes, definitely, Kathan. I got to know a lot of different open source projects through these hackathons, and that helped me to find out to find out the really great opportunities within open source as well. And of course, the different kind of development experiences that I had, it definitely helped me out. Yeah. So basically, as you can see, this is the way you can contribute to the different projects. And similarly, for example, let's say if you want to contribute to Google, right, what you have to do is basically just go over and understand, so for example, I'll quickly just showcase an example. So let's say I want to contribute to this project called Git Ignore, right? So what you have to do is you go to that particular project, the first thing that they have to do is that you have to go through its README and understand the README, install that project locally, and abide by the guidelines and create those pull requests, right? So something to keep in mind, very important, right? So that way, once you have understood the code, you can go to the issue section. So if I show you one of the other projects that actually has an open issue section, one thing that you can always do is that try to actually find out within the issues some of the beginner friendly issues, right? If you're getting started, a lot of different other open source projects, they have these labels by the name of beginners or first time contributors, right? You'll find those. So you can let's just search for first time contributors, or you'll find so specifically these kind of labels, right? And you can look out for those projects that are having those kind of labels, and that can actually help to contribute easily. So do look out for beginner friendly issues at the starting, but you can, as you can see, we have basically added all the different kind of issues that are currently there over, right? So hope that makes sense. But yeah, that sort of is also insight on. Now very quickly to just quickly go over some of the open source programs. So for example, Google Son of Code, as I already described, it's an open source program that takes place in the month, or during the months of April, May, June, July, August. And basically a lot of different open source companies, right, open source organizations, they attend these right, they attend this Google Son of Code. They become a part of it where they mentor students, right? And I'll quickly just go to googlesonofcode.com and show you. So this time there are around 198 different organizations, right? A lot of renowned organizations, and you can find out about all these different organizations by going on to summer.withgoogle.com/organizations, and you can refer to all their projects. You can also search projects based on a particular keyword, right? And the idea is that all of these, the workflow that they require is that you should contribute to some of these projects beforehand. And of course, the proposal that you create for the submission of these projects, right? It should show how you're going to be contributing to the project, how you have contributed earlier, and how active are you there in the community, right? So if you have all these three things going on, it's becomes very easy to actually get into programs like Google Son of Code. But only these programs should not be the end of the world, right? You can use all the other things, and of course you can contribute to other open source projects as well, and you can keep contributing without really thinking about these. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. And some of the other major programs are the Major League Hacking Fellowship. We have the Linux Foundation Mentorship Program, that is the LFX mentorship. Then we have the Alibaba Summer of Code. You can definitely go and look out the links for all these. I'll be sharing all of those links with you. But with that, I sort of conclude. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask. Let's see if there are any other questions. So I don't find any other questions. But if you do have, feel free to ask those questions. And of course, like thoroughly, like what should be mentioned in the GSoC proposal? It should be mentioned how are you willing to contribute to that particular project? What are the steps that you will be taking, and what initial contributions have you made in that domain, and where you'll be available, right? So those are the three things most importantly that needed. Your past contributions, what contributions have you made so far? What do you think of the project right now? So it's like there are definitely a lot of different organizations that are also there for game developers. So one that comes directly to my mind is Catrobat. You can have a look at Catrobat as an organization that does create games. But generally, like game development itself, apart from like companies like Unity, we haven't seen a lot of open source there. But of course, like there are a lot of different other companies and organizations that are going towards game development as well in open source. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask.
I'm guessing there aren't any more questions.
All right.
Yes. So, do you have anything else to add as well in your presentation? So,
No. I think, yeah. And then Utkarsh is asking a question, are there any recommended courses to start with open source? Utkarsh, I wouldn't say like there are like, you have to take any courses, because open source is something that, all of us actually do, right? Even if you're creating a project on GitHub, that is open source, right? So, like you can get started with Git and, how to use Git. And like, let's say start in with some kind of an open source programming language, with the help of which you can, contribute more efficiently to open source, right? So I hope like that makes sense.
okay. Uh, Thank you so much for the shock, sir. It has been a phenomenal experience. You literally widened the horizons of our mind, because most of us were clueless when it came to Google Summer of Code and how to contribute in open source as well.
Absolutely.
And taking this opportunity to, we would also like to tell you about an initiative MUJ
Sure.
ACM has taken to
Yeah.
help students get started on open source.
Okay.
We have put up 5 repositories on our GitHub that are meant for open source.
Yeah.
These are simple projects which will help students get a feel of both open source and GitHub.
Yeah.
And we have also put up posts on Git and GitHub on our official Instagram page. These are informative posts that will help students understand, first of all, the difference between Git and GitHub and how to use a platform like GitHub.
Yeah.
And to further augment on your tip to get started now, to the audience, here is your opportunity. Since you have all taken an initiative to join this talk and are interested in contributing to open source, now is your chance to take it up.
Yeah.
I will be putting up the link in the chat box, and we'll also share it with you in the group. And do check it out, everyone who have been involved. And so I would like you to give your comments on this as well.
Absolutely.
And I would also like to mention one more thing. I noticed that you have around 375 repositories in your GitHub.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is an impressive amount. I mean, it shows us exactly that you're the perfect example, you're the perfect person to tell us about this stuff. And it also shows the work that needs to be put in to reach to your stage. Kudos
No,
to
see,
you.
again, the thing is that, I mean, you could have probably like literally 4 to 5 repositories, but if you're keeping them, so a lot of my repositories were like, forks, and then because I used to participate in a lot of different hackathons, right? So, of course, like, even if you're just maintaining one repository, and that one repository, like that project that you have created, right, that has reached out to more than hundreds and thousands of users, even that is sufficient, right? So, I wouldn't necessarily say that, it depends a lot on the number of repositories that you have, but it's just that whether those repositories that you're creating, it's of use for someone, or like they're useful. So of course, like that does matter quite a lot. So it's not just related to like number of repositories, it's more sort of how useful or how valuable contributions that you're making is, that that makes more sense and more it matters more.
Yes, exactly. Being active on
Yeah,
these open source platforms and contributing meaningfully. Exactly.
absolutely.
So it has been a great experience, sir. Does anyone have any more questions? I don't think so. We don't have any more questions coming up. Any concluding stuff you'd like to say, sir?
No, thank you so much. Again, Ayush, like again, if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me on my LinkedIn. I think you have already shared that because I received so many
Yeah.
number of requests already. But yeah, I mean, if you like, I'll be more than happy to take probably like a more advanced session on any
Yes.
other topics, and love to stay connected and help out in other and any other way required. So yeah, more than happy to collaborate further.
Okay. We have one more question.
Okay.
Utkarsh Bhavgana says, "How can I contribute to OpenAI like organization?"
Okay, so that's a good question. And again, the thing is that whatever organization that you want to contribute to, as we said that, look out for their projects, right? Because every organization has a bunch of different projects that have been written in different types of languages. So based on your, based on whether like you love the project so much that, you want to learn new type of technologies, you can do that. Or let's say you can choose a project that is comfortable for you based on your level of experience with that particular programming language, and then you can start contributing to it. And again, the basic flow of contributing is you look at the project, you go through its documentation. Because see, I love to give this analogy that if you don't know how to use WhatsApp, and if I tell you that you have to implement and change the color of the double tick from blue to red, if you don't know what exactly does the double tick mean, or where exactly is it found in WhatsApp, you'll find it very difficult to contribute to it. So the idea is that first you go through the project, you completely understand what does that project does, right? You go through the documentation, you go through its readme, then you start off with one small feature. It could be it could be as small as a feature of just changing the color of, let's say, one of the UI elements, or let's say it could be a very small change of fixing some grammatical errors in the documentation. And on the basis of that, then you start growing yourself by contributing more and more. And the more you contribute, the better you'll get exposed to code base, because these large projects, they have like hundreds and thousands of lines of code, and it's not possible to learn the code or understand the code at one go. So you break down the entire code into pieces, and usually they do that, right? So let's say like, and there's a issue that is related to one of the files that is only related to the login component. So you just go and look at that login component and just refer to that. And if you don't get it, like, there are mentors available in the communities through which you can ask them, and you can, they can assist you in understanding the logics. So that way, that is like the ideal way in which you should approach and contributing to these large organizations.
That was great. Okay. Thank you. I guess we can end the session on this note.
Yeah,
If we have any more questions regarding the same, we'll make sure to send it to you personally, and we'll
sure.
make sure that the reply reaches to the person who's asking the question.
Yeah,
And thank you so much, sir. This has been a phenomenal experience. I'm saying it again,
absolutely. Thank
but
you so
we
much
really,
for
I
having me.
personally learned a lot as well. Being a
Yeah,
fresher, most of the audience were freshers, and it has really been an insightful experience. We got to know about a lot of stuff, including open source, GitHub, GSoC. You also mentioned Alibaba Summer of Code as well. So it has it has been a very informative experience, and thank
yeah,
you so much for taking out your time on a weekend
not an issue.
and helping us out and
Yeah,
taking this talk. Thank you so much, sir. Thank
yeah,
you,
thank you so much.
audience, as well, for
Yeah,
staying and being an active audience,
yeah,
actually asking questions and taking part in this talk. And I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Hope you guys learned as much as we did. And we'll keep on coming up with more such talks later. And and you can suggest, and we'd also be posting a feedback form in the group, and you can put up your questions and put up your feedbacks regarding the talk as well. So thank you for everyone for coming out.